Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat on a topic that one of you raised and that I've seen come up, sporadically in the comments. And so I thought it would be time to address it, which is, why does Erich Leinsdorf get no love as a conductor? This is really an interesting question. It sort of says a lot about our musical culture and priorities and how the record business works and the politics of it and whatnot. So let's go into this in a little bit of detail and see what comes out. Leinsdorf was a very fine generalist conductor and a wonderful operatic conductor. I saw him do Strauss's Elektra a few times at the Met. It was always very, very exciting. I mean, he could really whip an orchestra up to a fury, especially in the opera house. However, his career was an interesting and unusual one. He was born in Vienna. He grew up there. He trained there, along with a lot of, similarly trained Viennese conductor types. He was friendly with Toscanini and that crew. He came to America after, Hitler came to power because he came from a Jewish family. And he worked at the Met. He was appointed music director of the Cleveland Orchestra for about 10 minutes, but he had taken American citizenship and was drafted into the Army. And so he left Cleveland as soon as he got to Cleveland, which paved the way for George Szell to take over, which was, quite a fortuitous series of events, some people would say. But the fact that Szell got to Cleveland and raised it to incomparable heights gave everyone the opportunity to sort of trash Leinsdorf. Now, admittedly, he was a difficult guy to get along with. He really was. He had a very, very prickly personality. He wasn't afraid to call it as he saw it. But we shouldn't make too much of that. We hear a lot about people with difficult personalities in the arts. Don't they all have difficult personalities? That's why they're in the arts. And conductors are easy to get along with, especially that generation of conductors. Like Szell was easy. Toscanini was easy. Furtwängler was a pushover? No, they were not, and neither was Leinsdorf. So I don't think we can make too much of a big deal about that. He had a very good relationship with RCA Records because he was the conductor in a bunch of opera productions that made in Italy, which was sort of inexpensive, with the RCA Italiana Opera Orchestra, which whatever that was, and he did some really terrific work with that group, exciting work with really first-rate singers. So he had a good reputation as an opera conductor. He did especially the German school, the Wagner-Strauss people. As I mentioned, he made that fantastic recording of Strauss's Salome with Caballé in the title role, always underrated. He recorded a Walküre for Decca, let's not forget, with Birgit Nilsson, at the same time that Kulshaw and Schulte were doing The Complete Ring. And that really pissed everybody off. And many people feel, as I do, frankly, that it's a better Walküre than the Schulte one with Birgit Nilsson, who's pretty great in both of them. But yeah, he just had that extra edge of excitement that was really just pretty terrific. However, as an orchestral conductor, outside of the opera house, he had no charisma whatsoever. And I say that guardedly, because how do you define charisma, first of all? And second of all, it's a very subjective quality, isn't it? You can't describe it, you can't really hear it. But if you listen to things like his Beethoven recordings or his Brahms recordings of the German standards, he did do a very good Mozart cycle, by the way. But even his Mozart, it was neat, it was correct, it was well played, it was always prepared properly. It had no interpretive mannerisms or egocentricities, but it also had very little that was overwhelmingly compelling, very little personality. He was a tightly controlled conductor. And so while he did make some outstanding recordings, most of his recordings, when they started coming out, especially his recordings in Boston, which was his plum assignment, getting the Boston Symphony after all in the 1960s as the successor to Charles Munch, most of those recordings were greeted with a big yawn by the record-going public and populace. Now, sometimes he had fabulous soloists. When he worked with Arthur Rubinstein and things, we had a lot of Erich Leinsdorf recordings when I was growing up because we had the concerto stuff. But in terms of his own vision of major orchestral works, especially of the German standard repertoire, he had very little to contribute. Now, many of you will take umbrage at that comment and say, wait, 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 wait. I have this, and I like this, and I like that. Let's be clear. No one gives a damn what you like. I don't care what you like. People really don't care what I like. It's not about what we like. A lot of what he did is likable. Very little of what he did is bad. The point is, there are comparisons to be made. And if you make the comparisons with the existing discographies and the performances that either receive general acclaim, rightly or wrongly, the reality of the situation is that he did not shine. His star did not ascend. And when he left Boston, he never took another permanent post. He spent the rest of his life as a guest conductor, doing things that he wanted to do, which really suited him very well. Now, I saw him several times with the New York Philharmonic. He was, along with Leonard Slatkin and a couple other conductors, one of the best programmers I've ever seen. His concert programming was always fabulous because he would play anything. He just loved to do interesting repertoire. And it was fun to go see his programs because on paper they looked great. But I can't remember a single program I saw with him live that looked great on paper that was outstandingly thrilling. Finster, what are you doing? Excuse me, that's the cat having her morning, Mylar scrunchy toy event. Anyway, I can't remember a single program he did that was supposed to be like so great on paper that was thrilling in performance. I mean, the performances were never bad. They were well prepared, but they just never took flight. They never made you say, wow. It was the arrangement of the program that was interesting rather than the actual interpretive ideas that he brought to bear on it. And that sounds like a sad thing to say, but that was my experience of him. And when it comes to recordings, the things that he did best, aside from the operas, which some of which, as I said, were fabulous, was contemporary music. Things like the Hinastera Piano Concerto and Variaciones Concertantes. I mean, that kind of repertoire, it's not well represented in terms of reissues. We do need a selective reissue of Leinsdorf's work, I think. But what does RCA put out? They put out his Beethoven cycle. I mean, when they've got, it's now RCA and Columbia. So you've got Bruno Walter, you've got George Sell, you've got Bernstein, you've got, and then there's Leinsdorf. So however good it may have been, and it was good, it was very good, he's not going to get the kind of attention that he would get for doing the more interesting music that nobody cares about, unfortunately. And that is the problem. Remember, he did that wonderful disc of Korngold's Die Tote Stadt. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. And you always knew with Leinsdorf that when you did unusual repertoire, something that was off the beaten path, that he would do it well, that he would come prepared, that he would make everybody play, that he'd bring out the best of the singers. He just did that. He did that regularly. He was incredibly reliable. That's one of the reasons the record labels liked him. Of course, he did have one operatic calamity. It wasn't a musical calamity. It was a financial calamity, and that was his Lohengrin, which RCA basically went out of the classical business after doing, certainly the classical opera business, because he did it in Boston. It was a hideously expensive project. It was a very, very fine recording of Lohengrin with some excellent singing, but oh my, it didn't sell at all. It was very similar, by the way. Opera is always sort of like, the Waterloo of record labels because it's just so expensive and complicated. You can't do sales. The next operatic Waterloo of a similar type, for those of you record buffs who are out there, was the Sony Claudio Abbado Complete Boris Godunov with the Berlin Philharmonic. Like the Lohengrin, a wonderful Boris Godunov, an opera that, well, it's not going to be the world's biggest seller, but Sony was famous. It was on the Sony Gold. It was, when Japan was throwing billions of dollars at Sony for no particular reason, and at Claudio Abbado for even less of a particular reason. And it sold less than 1,000 copies worldwide, initially anyway. I mean, it was famous for being just a complete waste, and it cost him like millions. It cost him a fortune. Well, that was the Lohengrin, the Leinsdorf Lohengrin, and that really, really hurt his career with RCA, because then he became a big money loser. And being a money loser is not a good thing to be at any time, and particularly not in the classical music business, which is kind of a money loser anyway. For many labels are considered to be that way. So that was the end of his Boston career, basically on records and also in Boston, and that was what happened with him. So where does that lead us? He got the job in Boston because of his association with RCA, largely. Remember that Boston was a Red Seal organization. That, Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony recorded for RCA. RCA wanted to have control over this legacy, which was, at the time, presumably rather profitable. By the time Leinsdorf left, it was no longer profitable, or no longer as profitable as it had been. He also was the anti-Charles Munch. Munch was a passionate, spontaneous, kind of spiritual guy who was he had tons of charisma, exactly what Leinsdorf did not have. Leinsdorf did wonderful things in Boston. I mean, he really established Tanglewood as Boston Symphony's summer home. He, like I said, programmed all kinds of marvelous stuff that you wouldn't get to hear otherwise. But no one cares about that. No one cared about that commercially. And frankly, even if he had been more commercially viable, and, interesting, there was the fact that he just wasn't an interesting interpreter. He wasn't. He was a technically accomplished interpreter. And I say this again, knowing some of you will take umbrage at it and say, well, I love his recording of what? Blah. Listen, anyone makes 100 or dozens and dozens of recordings. Some of them are going to be good. Some of them may be fabulous. But that's not the point. And whether we like them or not is not the point. The point is, how did his career run? How was he perceived during his lifetime? I remember hearing him on the radio every so often. There was that wonderful show on WQXR called First Hearing, with George Jelinek hosting. And I had the great honor of being a panelist on that show for several years on WQXR, after Leinsdorf's time, of course. But he was on that show reviewing records, giving his opinion. And his opinion was marvelous. He was so much fun to hear about and talk to. He wrote some books about conducting and things. I mean, he had tremendous personality in real life talking about music. It was just when he played it that he wasn't all that interesting. And, it's all a game of comparisons, my friends. It really is, especially in the record business. When you're playing one thing, you can listen to other people play the same thing, and you could decide who does it best. And generally speaking, Leinsdorf was always good, but not great. And that was a problem. So don't come back to me, please, on the comments with a list of Erich Leinsdorf recordings that you think are wonderful. I'm not arguing about that. Everybody will think everything's wonderful. There isn't anything that's so bad that someone out there doesn't like it. And you're dealing with a major orchestra with a major conductor, both of whom knew what they were doing. They could get around the notes. So that's not the issue. The issue is, how does his legacy stack up? And sadly, it doesn't stack up terribly well. We can revalue it. We can reevaluate it, whatever we want to do with it. We could reconsider it. I think we should. I would be delighted to point out his best recordings. I am, because I only care about whether the recording's great or not. I don't care who did it. I don't care why they did it. I don't care what they were thinking. That's not the issue. So yeah, he'll show up from time to time, and he has, as some of you have pointed out. But will he get a sort of marquee attention from me or anybody else? No, he won't, because to be honest, he doesn't deserve it. He didn't deserve it in his lifetime. He doesn't deserve it now. He did yeoman work as a very good practicing musician. And that's not a bad thing. That's really not a bad thing. It's just the way it was. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.